Let's start with putting a definition around what internal mobility actually is.
It's not just about hard work, it's about visibility. You have to make yourself visible. You have to understand the aspects of getting promoted, moving internally, and a lot of that is your reputation. Your reputation really is your resume.
It's really important for candidates to understand that if you're like in a 1,000-person business, say, there's going to be 100 to 200 hires every single year that is going to come from the existing candidate pool of your own business. That is how people get jobs nowadays.
But also you have to be clear with your manager at some point. What are your goals? Don't be afraid to have this conversation. Your manager is expecting you to have this conversation, and a good manager will say,
Hello and welcome to the Open to Work podcast. As ever, weekly job search advice in the nice bite-sized format of a 30 to 40-minute podcast where we speak to recruiting and HR leaders from around the world. This week, we are welcoming back Farah Sharghi to the podcast. Welcome, Farah.
thank you so much, Matthew, for having me.
You're an esteemed company. Only one other person other than James Hudson has been a double guest now. So you and Jim Miller.
Nice.
How
I
does
am
it
very
feel?
honored. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you again so much for having me. I really enjoyed our last conversation, so can't wait to dive into today's.
Oh yeah, and today's is going to be a bit of a different kind of approach than we take in some of our other episodes because we're focusing on internal mobility. So for candidates who have hopefully listened to this podcast, then applied the techniques that we've been coaching people on for the last year, and now are in their role and thinking about what to do next in their role. This podcast is for you, or for any newcomers who are looking just to navigate their internal politics and internal dialogue of a move within their own business. So hopefully loads to unpack here. I know that everyone obviously should know who you are by now, Farah, but why don't you just give us a quick recap on who you are?
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. If you don't know who I am, I'm Farah Sharghi. I am a former technical recruiter turned job search career coach. As a recruiter, I worked full time for companies like Google, Lyft, Uber, TikTok, and the New York Times, along with other Silicon Valley based startups. Something I do want to mention, because it is relevant to the conversation, is after university, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. I worked as an engineer, but then I spent a decade working in finance. And for 7 years, I worked at Fidelity Investments. And during that 7 year time period, I got 7 promotions. So I know a
No.
thing or two about internal mobility, not just
Yeah.
job hopping outside like I do as a recruiter.
Okay, well, setting the scene, not only are you an incredible recruiter, but also apparently quite good at finance. So, if you need any advice, ask Farah
I got
for
you.
anything actually in this world, it seems like. um, okay, so let's start with putting a definition around what internal mobility actually is.
So, my definition of internal mobility is that, imagine this: instead of looking externally for another job, you're looking internally for another job. I mean, that's pretty much what it is, right? It's
Mhm.
promotions, it's looking at different teams, different verticals. So, for example, if you work in product and you want to get into maybe product marketing, so those are
Mhm.
two separate verticals within, let's say, a larger organization. And so, internal mobility allows you to make a job change or move upwards in your vertical without having the stress of trying to get a job somewhere else.
Would you define promotions as internal mobility as well?
Kind of. I think it depends, right? I mean, in general, I mean, internal interviews and internal mobility and job search is less about, can you do the job? And it's more so about like, should you be the one to do it? That's how I
Mhm.
view it anyway.
Mhm. Why is internal mobility like an important part of any business and any hiring kind of practice?
From a financial standpoint, it is a lot less expensive for the business to hire internally than it is to hire externally.
Mhm.
Why? Because obviously the fees to hire, if you hire an external recruiting agency to help you fill the role, if your recruiters have to hire for that role, it's very expensive to hire
Mhm.
people. One, two, that external hire has to come in and get onboarded. That onboarding process can take anywhere between 3 to 6 months before they're fully able to actually do the job. Whereas if you already work at the company, one, the financial burden of hiring is actually significantly less because the recruiter is just assisting with an internal job
Mhm.
search, so it's a lot cheaper. One, two, your onboarding process will also be a lot shorter. because you already know a lot of the internal systems and tools, so they don't have to spend as much time and effort and energy onboarding you.
Mhm. I think one of the best examples of this is in sales organizations. They have this very clear like step from like BDR, which is like a junior business development representative, which is like a junior sales rep, and then you're
Mhm.
stepping into like an AE, account executive, which is like a closing sales representative, and the like time to ramp is reduced by almost 50% in lots of companies through hiring an internal rep, and their highest cohort performers are almost always people who've come from a BDR and stepped into an internal account executive role.
Mhm.
And so there's huge incentives for businesses to build this like motion of hiring and training someone in a, it also like less expensive
Yeah.
because they're hiring a more junior employee. You're training them in the way that you want them to be trained, and then you're enabling them to deliver within your own business over like multiple years, which is significantly less expensive than bringing in an external employee that's already at a higher salary and then get betting that they're going to then be able to adapt to your organization. You have like an element of proof attached to that person's success where
Mhm.
you wouldn't have that same element of proof for an external person.
Totally. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because when I worked in finance, I went from what we call a service function into a sales function. So
Mm-hmm.
I proved myself in the service function because I was servicing high net worth clients, and then I decided I wanted to make the move from where I was to the San Francisco Bay Area, and the company paid for me to move. Then once I moved, they trained me under what they deemed appropriate in terms of like consultative sales models and constantly
Mm-hmm.
going to trainings. And so you're right, like they always reinvested into their employees to get them to do like the internal mobility either into other organizations or just
Mm-hmm.
up the ladder, and they rarely hired externally for those higher level roles because
Yeah.
like you said, it's so expensive to do that. It's actually cheaper, more cost effective to, train people internally.
Yeah. And the larger, I think, observed a business gets, the less they'll want to go to market externally, and they'll really invest in building this like internal motion of moving people through the business. And so, like a bulk of their hiring will be kind of junior and lower mid level, so that they can then enable people to move through the business. I think we are, like I said, in Muse, for example, where we're not quite there, right? Like we're still looking to acquire lots of skills that don't currently exist in the business, which is why our
Mhm.
internal mobility isn't quite where we'd want it to be.
Sure.
But goal wise, we want 20-30% of our business to be internal, but to be internal hires. And that's, that could be hundreds of people within a year. And so it's really important for candidates to understand that if you're like in a 1,000-person business, say, there's going to be 100 to 200 hires every single year that is going to come from your or the existing candidate pool of your own business before it goes out to market externally, which is important to realize that that is a critical part of how people get jobs nowadays.
I think the other thing people forget too is that when you hire externally, there's going to be that external friction that you're going to get from someone else out from outside of the company that's going to bring it into the company because they're either going to gel and
Mm,
adapt to the internal structure. That external piece could either be friction that's going to cause growth, right? Because
mm,
agitation creates the pearl, or it's going to have the adverse effect. And then they had spent all this time and money to hire this person only to say, you know what, this is probably not a good hire.
yeah.
So the risk is a lot less when they hire internally.
I think that's a really nice way of putting it. Like it's a risk analysis. Like either do we is the new friction that's going to come in from hiring someone externally going to be an accelerator to our business, and is that something we want to embrace the risk of, or do we want to de-risk it by hiring someone internally? But there is also an element of risk because they have to grow into that role, and so
Sure.
typically you see when you look at kind of really successful internal candidates. I'd love to hear like your perspective, having gone through this like long curve within a business, but it's
Mhm.
often people who are like super driven and very intellectually curious and able to learn new ideas really, really quickly to become
Sure.
high performers so they
Mhm.
can be put into different environments where they can then be successful.
Right.
What was your experience at and out of interest, and why did you think you got picked up as a in multiple roles within your last business?
I think part of the reason was one, the markets were tanking. And so as a result of that, they needed really good people to like move up quickly. And so I tell people, I go, yeah, I just hit the express lane. Like like the company had a lot of needs and they had to hire internally. And so reputation is your resume when it comes to
Mm,
internal mobility because like for example, this is a true story. When I worked for the premium department, and again, I'm handling multimillionaires and their inquiries and everything. They had an outside consultant. I don't know if it was McKinsey. I don't remember who it was. They had the consultant come onto the floor. So this is a bullpen floor. Okay. So for those of you who have watched movies about
Wall Street or
stockbrokers,
something.
yeah, like I mean, I was order taking. I had like slips of paper in case the systems went down. I was like IPO help desk. Like I was everything. So anyway, they brought in a consultant and the GM of the entire site. This is a 2,500 person site. Said, Farah, we want him to listen to your calls. I said, that's fine. So he sat next to me, very nice guy. And I just did my thing. And, for example, a client called in. I was like quickly scanning his account and I asked him some questions about his estate plan. And he said, oh, I don't know about that. And I said, well, okay, well, I'll have someone reach out to you because I see this is missing on your account. Let me make sure, you have that taken care of. Okay, great. So I didn't think anything of it. He stayed with me for about an hour. He left. At the end of the day, my director runs up to me. Farah, what? He goes, the consultant came in and did their assessment of like everybody that they listened to. And he said, out of anybody I've ever listened to ever, Farah is the best person I've ever listened to. And I was like, okay, like that, like not to say I'm amazing at everything. I'm like, I'm just doing my job and just like trying to build relationships because that is part of my job.
Mm,
And so after that, the GM said, if you ever like leave the site, which I did. I ended up moving to California. He goes, if you ever want to come back, you have
mm,
a job here. Don't worry
yeah.
about it. And so that really led to a lot of really cool future opportunities. Like I was part of like a little, group that they had. I mean, it was just like I said, I mean, when you do good work and it's not just about hard work, it's about visibility.
Mm,
You have to make yourself visible. If you are the invisible hard worker, you're just going to get more work put on your plate. You're not going to
mm,
get promoted. You have to understand the aspects of getting promoted, moving internally. And a lot of that is your reputation. Your reputation really is your resume.
mm. I think it's a really good point. I have like many friends from around the world who are very good at what they do, but quite poor at advocating for themselves in the context of their own business. And I think lots of the strongest workers within businesses are often just like heads down doing their thing really really well and get passed up to opportunities for other people who are like slightly more vocal. And I think that's a systems problem that exists within businesses, and it's it's a bias that exists like no matter where you are in the world, that you sort of have to understand how to quote unquote play the game. I
Sure.
mean, what's your like advice for people on how they can build like a reputation for themselves? Like, did you have like a process that you could follow?
So I have like a whole process that I go through with my own personal clients. But if
Hmm.
let's say my friend came to me and let's say you came to me, Matthew, and you're like, Farah, I'm like working really hard. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I just keep working hard and I get passed up for promotions or I can't move around. My boss won't let me. It's like, okay, well, first of all, we need to take a step back. Like, let's figure out what you're actually doing and not doing.
Mm,
So usually the disconnect is if I'm quiet and I just put my head down and do my work, my boss is going to notice. Yeah, of course they're going to notice. They're going to give you more work. But remember, your job when it comes to your manager is two things. Actually, this is for anybody listening, unless you're the CEO, and even then you stop to answer the board of directors. You have two things you have to be able to do. One, make your manager's job easier. Two, make your manager look good. Period. That's your job. If you can do that, you can do anything. You can
hmm.
go anywhere because if you make your manager look good, and who are you going to make them look good in? You're going to make them look good in the eyes of the skip level. So, a skip level, if you don't know what that is, that's your manager's manager, the
Yeah.
cross functional business partners, right? And then what you also have to do is like, okay, this is something I teach my clients. So, here's a freebie, folks. Find the PR agent in your department who is going to speak positively of you because you helped them with something.
Hmm.
That could be different for any organization at any company, but figure out who that person is and also speak up and seek to understand before being understood. Understand the business. If you're the kind of person that's putting your head down and finding all the problems and just presenting it to your boss, how are you making their job easier? You're
Yeah.
not. You're just pointing out problems, causing more problems for them. Now, if you come to them and say, hey, I identified this problem and I've also identified a solution that works within the whatever it is that we're working on, it doesn't really agitate that much, it doesn't really disrupt too much. That's a solution that your boss probably will say okay to.
Hmm.
So think about the lowest common denominator in terms of what your manager has to do and like get buy-in on. And I think that's actually that's a much better approach if you're going to just be the person that's not going to speak
Yeah.
much. Like, think about that. And then when you're in meetings, be the first one to speak and or the last person. Just like with studying, because when you study, if you can't just go for an hour straight, if you do 20-minute blocks, you'll always remember like the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes of the thing that you were studying. So if
Mm.
you do that a few times, like 3 times in an hour, you'll remember more than you would if you had studied for an entire hour. Same thing applies in meetings. The first person who speaks, the last person who speaks really is going to build up more of a reputation.
We are so excited to be sponsored by HireGuide. HireGuide is an end-to-end interview decision platform that makes hiring decisions faster, fairer, and twice as predictive of on-the-job employee performance. As a recruiting leader, I've been looking for a tool that can help me run better interviews across my organization at scale to make better hiring decisions. So when I found HireGuide, I thought all my hopes had been answered. They use cutting-edge AI and behavioral science to enable you to operationalize structured interviews and skills-based hiring that can help you find those star candidates. Hiring a dream team is no easy task, but with HireGuide, it can be.
One of the things I really want to pick up on and go into in a bit more detail is this idea of like a career, like who are your career influencers, right? And I don't mean like your Farahs of the world. Of course, she's a career influencer. I mean, who is going to be in the room when they decide whether or not you should get that promotion? Who are the decision makers? They're going to sit around a table in promotion season, in comp review season, in like when someone pitches you to be promoted or to change role. Who is who is going to be the people that get asked, hey, what do you think of Matt? Hey, what do you think of Farah? Like, why should this person? I don't know if I agree with that promotion. Like, why? Like, who is going to be the influencer? And it's often going to be like someone in your HR organization, a couple of other people who are part of that LT group, maybe a chief of staff or something like that, and who has the ears of the decision makers. And I think that's often like where you need to start building some of these relationships so that they can perceive you in a way that is like genuinely impactful, and as like as someone who's inquisitive and built the right way. Like those people are realistically going to influence whether or not you get a promotion, even if they barely work with you. Right. So that's a problem of that business. They should try and solve that problem, but is the reality of how most of these conversations end up going down. So sure. Identify the 5 people who are going to be in that room and build genuine relationships with those people so that they are advocates for you when that time comes.
I agree. I mean, what I always tell my clients is that, in the first 6 months of working at a company, like, yeah, of course you have to do your job. You have to have your deliverables. That's your core job. And that's just one component of your work. That's not going to get you promoted, right? Yeah. What you have to do is you have to manage your manager and manage your stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so, identifying, like you said, who's my manager's manager? What are the cross-functional stakeholders? What are the other departments that I'm working with? And then when you work with your manager, you need to identify success metrics. You need to make sure those are clear. You need to pair with a mentor. You need to make sure you're having either weekly or biweekly meetings with your manager. And during those meetings, you are going over your success metrics, looking at like the data, right? Because in order for them to support any future promotions, you need to go back to the data. They'll always go back to the data. It's not just based on personality, right? And then once you understand the rules of the game, then okay, here's how I can over deliver, right? Yeah. And then how is it that someone I'm working with can share my achievements with my manager or my skip level, right? That's the PR agent aspect of it, right? But also you have to be clear with your manager at some point. Hey, be explicit about what your career goals are. You want to stay at the company? You want to move internally? You want to move upward? What are your goals? Don't be afraid to have this conversation. Your manager is expecting you to have this conversation. And a good manager will say, okay, let's look at your metrics. Are you doing your job? Are you going above and beyond? Because if you are, great. Then they can support you with whichever direction you want to go and help you get there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It first starts by putting words around it and defining and making people aware that you have like ambitions outside of the business. And I've been kind of, I always like being quite direct and open with what my ambitions are. And sometimes that bites me in the ass, as my family likes to say. But like, generally speaking, people know where I stand and what my goals are. Right. And that means that I can build like a clearer map of how to get there. And that I can say like, what are the barriers, and address these sorts of things like months in advance of like, and if it's my performance, I know exactly, I can then put a plan together on like how to address that performance. Most companies, for example, will have minimum criteria for you to be able to have a move internally. One of them will be your, like, a core of it will be your performance, right? If you have not exceeded or met expectations over the last 2 quarters, you probably aren't going to be eligible for a promotion, or you're going to be ended up hospital passed into another organization that doesn't really want to have you in the first place. And that's also not a great place to be, because the reality is if you applied for a role internally, and we'll talk about that slightly in a second, they are definitely going to check with your manager. They're gonna get on a Slack, get on Teams, whatever, and say, hey, what did you think of this guy? Should I hire them? And that's, again, the politics. You need to be influencing the room where it happens and take control of that narrative.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they treat internal mobility too casually. And they take their internal reputation too casually, and they just kind of assume like, oh, I don't need to prepare. I don't need to do anything. I already work here. It's fine. Like, I'll just apply to the job and I'll get the job. But like you said, Matthew, some companies have like a 6-month rule or a 12-month rule. Like, you can't move because, like you said, they need to see those metrics to determine if you are even worth moving around. Because if you're not hitting your metrics, you need to stay where you are to prove that you can actually do the work and do the job.
Yeah. I think what we really talked about a lot of the time is internal promotions, right? Like, so when the time comes, when the new role comes up within the team that you're working in, you put your hand up and you can, you don't have to interview for that job. It's given to you because you have merited it. There's a whole other category where you actually have to go and interview for jobs internally. Maybe describe kind of in your experience how people generally end up navigating and finding these opportunities, and then what kind of some of the differences are between interviewing an internal candidate and external candidate.
So when it comes to identifying internal opportunities, what I've found is sometimes the managers will come around and say, hey, such and such group is hiring, or you just have to look internally, right?
Yeah.
Just look at the internal job board. If you have a good mentor internally, then you should be able to have some confidence in them and ask them some questions like, hey, if I ever wanted to move internally, what's the best approach, right? So let's say you identify an internal role. Okay, now what? Do you apply? No. You need to find out who is working in that organization. Do you know anybody in that org? If so, you need to have a coffee chat with them. You need to see what's going on over there, right? So you need to do the internal networking piece, figure out what's the reputation of that manager. Do you even want to work for them? Maybe not. Maybe they suck. Don't jump into a frying pan situation if you've got a good gig going, right? Like, again, similar to external job search, except this time you actually have more keys to the kingdom and can unlock more doors than an external candidate would not be able to do, right? That's where you have the advantage. Then from there, you can decide, okay, if this is something I really want to do, then you actually do have to talk to your manager and let them know. Because if you just apply to a job, and like you said, Matthew, earlier, if you just apply and then it's like, surprise, they want to like move internally, they're going to be offended. They're going to go, why didn't you? But we could have talked about this, because before applying, maybe the manager could have talked to the other manager and said, hey, do you have anybody in pipeline? Like, my person wants to come to your team. They can do you some favors by helping you. Your manager, if your manager isn't supportive, that's a whole different conversation. But assuming you have a great manager who wants to see you succeed and move on with your career, then they should be able to help and do those things. So that's like, those are some major things that are very different internally than externally.
Unless you were in like a psychologically unsafe position with your current manager, always work with your manager, because they need to be your number one advocate for when you start that transition, and they should be a number one advocate, because then they want to also be thinking about pipelining your backfill for when you do eventually make that move. That's what great leaders do. They want to support you and see you move on, but you really can't. It's very, very difficult to get a job without your manager supporting you into that process, unless the business have already deemed that they are like not a good manager,
right?
In which case you can maybe circumvent them and go to HR or something like that. But again, like, that's a whole other podcast. That's not for us. The other element is bookmark your internal jobs page. There will definitely be an internal jobs catalog, and the number of people I've seen like through my entire career ask me, "Hey, where can I like find this job opportunity?" And I'm like, it was always there. You always could have gone and found it, and it always was. They're all automatically pushed internally, unless there's like a very, very good reason why they're not, which often there is. But like, that's, you got to look for it, and you got to be proactive in it, and you got to stay on the mind of certain teams that you want to look into. And if you can lay the groundwork before those roles even go live, that's the best scenario, right? Like, you want to move into marketing, you every 1 or 2 months you're meeting with someone in the marketing team, and so that when that moment comes up, they're like, yes, we've got to go to Farah. We've already had 5 or 6 meetings with her. She seems fantastic. She's super proactive, super keen to learn. She's exceeded her targets the last couple of quarters. We're willing to take a punt. Let's go.
Another tool that you might be able to have at your company, depending on the company, larger companies will have some type of program where you can go on loan or on
Mm.
Bungee to another department. So, for example, when I was at Uber, we had the opportunity to work with learning and development. So it was kind of like a 80%, 20% program. So 80% of the time I did my job, 20% of the time I worked with learning and development. So I got to develop trainings for recruiters. So there was like a whole cohort group of us that did it. A lot of them dropped out. I was the only one left behind because I ended up facilitating and being like the lead facilitator for that. And so I ended up training other recruiters at Uber globally. So APAC, EMEA,
Nice.
Latam, super cool. Actually, side note, when I got laid off from Uber because it was COVID and nobody was taking rides, I was supposed to do a training that evening, and I was like, well, sorry guys, can't do this. But it was still a cool experience, and I didn't have to quit my job to go and contribute and even see if I like it.
Mm.
Right. And there's aspects of it that I really enjoyed, but do I want to do that for my career? No, I don't.
For an internal interview, because like most roles will require you to go and do an actual interview process. How would you prepare for that, if at all, differently to how you might prepare for an external interview?
So what's nice is that you can speak to other people who are on the team. You'll know you'll be able to identify who the recruiter is and maybe have a coffee with them, as opposed to like going, oh, it's a black hole. Why isn't the recruiter reaching out to me? You
Hmm.
don't really have to worry about that because you can just like literally go up to people and talk to them.
Just like them, say, hey, why
Yeah.
haven't I received anything back from this? Could you give me some more
Yeah.
context on the role?
Are you kidding me? I don't do that. I just show up at their desk, be like, hey, so what's up? Like, I saw you don't have your headphones on. Assume that it's okay for me to come up and be a little proactive, but like just checking in, want to see what's up with the timeline, right? And then that way you're face to
Every
face.
fair approach is like a little bit sassy, but a very, very
Yeah.
kind. And it's like, just wanted to check in.
Checking in. But remember, no baseball calls, no hotel calls, no checking in, no touching base. You always have to have a plan when you're speaking to somebody so you can headline it with, I'm just checking in, but then really talk about what you want to talk about.
um, when I think about internal interviews, my number one tip to everyone is like a fundamental starting point is do always effing prepare. The
Yes.
number of internal interviews that I've seen happen is like, well, they just did not prepare at all. They assumed they had got the job. Like they didn't do any prep for this role at all. And it happens so often. It's
Mhm.
crazy how many people walk into internal interviews with doing no preparation for what they're about to interview for.
That's what, yeah. Earlier I said, like, people take it too casually. They're like, yeah,
Oh,
I
that
got
is the
this.
number. It is the number one biggest error you can make when applying for a role internally is you didn't take it seriously enough from soup to nuts, start to finish, every single element. You didn't network, you didn't interview properly, you didn't
Mhm.
prepare, didn't put a case study together, all of that. 90% of people aren't doing like almost any of it. It's
Yeah,
really disappointing to see.
it really is. I remember one time I interviewed when I was at Fidelity Investments, and my mentor asked, he goes, "How was your interview?" And I go, "I'm confused." He goes, "Why?" I go, "Well, I prepared, but all the questions were like easy. Like it was all softball questions. I'm confused." He goes, "That's a good sign." He's like, "You got the job. Don't worry about it." I was like, and again, I was just confused, and he was right. He was just like, "Oh yeah, Fair's going forward with it. It's okay." So like you still have to prepare, but
Mm,
just know that if you're in your interview and you're getting softball questions, it's probably one of two
yeah,
extremes. One, you either got the job, or two, they're just doing it out of courtesy.
yeah.
But either way, you still have to prepare.
Yeah, fully agree. And I see this much more with candidates who are early in their careers. So if you've got like your first ever job, or like was the job that you got in this company or one of your first or second ever jobs, and you don't really know like the mechanics because you've never seen it happen before, and you don't know how like a business works properly, and you kind of just think, oh, I guess if I apply for a role and they gotta give it to me, I guess. It's super not a given. And I can't stress that you'll almost certainly need to do an interview, maybe even do a case study presentation. Like they'll want to replicate certain elements, if not all of the elements, that they would put an external candidate through. Personally, I don't believe that you should replicate an external interview with an internal interview. There's loads of reasons for that, but I'll leave that to the side. But you need to be able to clearly demonstrate that you can do the next role, and that you're thinking about the challenges and how you would skill yourself up to be as good as the person that they could hire on the external market today. Because the reality is, if they're going external market for that role, they're going to be able to hire someone who's got way more experience in that job, because that's why they're going to the external market in the first place. But you bring something else and you're a known quantity. And so you've got to be able to demonstrate that you can get to that external candidate's level of quality quicker than they can, and produce value quicker than they can. And if you can do that, you will be in an extremely good position to get that job.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other advantage that internal candidates have is, again, depending on the company, you may actually be able to have access to trainings that those other people have. So why not be sneaky and go check out those trainings, learn a few things, and then you'll really blow them out of the water.
Yeah. I think it's when you think about like this internal mobility, like kind of journey that someone might go on, it really starts posts that from like in your first 6 months within the business. And then it really starts to trail in at the 6 month mark, when you started to show the case that you can deliver, and you're starting to kind of think about what does the next year look like from that moment. So when you cross that 18-month horizon, you're hopefully, a good performer will be thinking about the 18-month to 2-year horizon move. And then you're starting to think about the impact that you can have in the next version. You're starting to lay the seeds with the manager, you're starting to network internally, and you're starting to be a bit proactive, because it takes time. You don't want to seem overzealous, but by networking slowly over a period of couple of months and building that reputation with the teams you want to be a part of, it'll become like a natural, or potentially a natural fit. But it takes, like any type of networking, you lay seeds, you water those seeds, and then when the time is right, you can then harvest.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned overzealous, because I do find that younger folks tend to be like, I'm going to be the CEO in 5 years. I literally had someone say that to me after he got his MBA. And I'm like, it's been 10 years and you're a senior recruiter. Like, what happened? Oh, it's called reality check. It's not that you don't have the capability, but there are things that come over a period of time.
Yeah.
And can you learn them? Yeah. But it's like, I love watching tennis, and it's interesting when you watch an experienced player who's been playing for a really long time versus an inexperienced player, because you can tell at certain points in the match when experience starts to triumph over like youth and like, being confident.
Yeah. It's that exposure to scenarios, then, that you have that pattern recognition that sometimes that you just can't replace that. Like, I have recruiters all through my career have been, who are super ambitious, and they want to progress through the ranks, and they want to have my job at some point. And I'm like, that's great. But you also need to see all of the different varieties of all the different scenarios that could pop up, and get that level of exposure that you might not necessarily be aware of, and how to respond to those scenarios. And it's the variety of cases that then ends up building a picture that you can then build a system around how you would solve those problems at scale. That's like the kind of jump step that I think that lots of people miss, because they see their individual scenarios, but they don't see, how would I fix a scenario at scale as a leader of a team, or like thinking about this problem in a bigger group.
Absolutely. I mean, as recruiters, I mean, I have worked in like leadership functions and recruitment. It does take that pattern recognition, because people are inherently the same. It's just how they approach problems fundamentally can be different, and people themselves can be different. They never want to point the finger at themselves like they're the problem. They're like, no, it's you, it's this, it's that. Okay, well, here we go. All right, like I've seen this before. Like, let's get them to self-discover. So you have to ask them questions so they can just like self-discover into, so you're laughing, you know what I'm talking about. So I get them to self-discover, and then they say the thing that you want them to say. And you're like, I'm so glad you came up with that on your own. So now that you've said that, can we go forward with XYZ that we had planned on?
Yeah.
Great.
Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. There was a really interesting book that I want to kind of wrap up with, called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And if you are someone who is stuck in a role and you're struggling to get into that next level, I wholeheartedly recommend it if you are looking to take a step change in your career. One of the things it maps out is this idea of what it's trying to, I guess, address is people who have got to a certain level and for some reason or another they're stuck. They can't move up. They're like don't really want to get another job because they're doing really well, but like they can't get that step into the next role within their career. And the entire theory that this guy puts in place is that it's all around collecting, receiving, and actioning feedback. And then over this 2-year period, over like a period of time, demonstrating the use of that feedback that will then change someone's fundamental perception of you. So if you were always perceived in this one way because you maybe started in a company when you were like an IC and you were 25 and now you're in your 30s and you're really a different person, but you're still kind of perceived by people as that like person in their 20s who was a bit of a joker, you need to go on this journey of like changing people's perceptions proactively. And that's really hard. And this book and this kind of collecting feedback and showing that you're going on that journey can be a really important way to change that internal brand. And I would highly, highly recommend it if that story of being blocked resonates with you, if you've been in business for a long time.
Yeah, that's true. And to that point, to add on to that, I think that's wonderful. What you said, Matthew, is that when you increase your visibility as this new person who's grown and you're not plateaued, right? You have to demonstrate externally so people can hear that, oh,
Yeah.
that was really thoughtful what they just said, right? Or oh, that that landed because of this and that, right? It's again that increase in visibility. The other thing I want to point out, because I want to make sure that we talk about this too, is that when you work with people internally, that is networking. Those people are going to move on to other companies. And so networking internally is super, super important. Building your reputation is super, super important because let's say in the future you get, laid off, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
Right. And you're like, oh, I never went to networking events. I didn't have to. I was in this job for a really long time. I run into that scenario a lot where people have been at their company 10, 15, 20 years. And they're like, I have 20 connections on LinkedIn. I don't know what I'm doing. And I never really connected with anybody at work. So if you're going to be playing this corporate game, you got to play it. If you don't want to be in it, go start your own business. That's a whole nother ball of wax, but you can't just pick and choose what you want to participate in and what you don't want to participate in. Because if you pick and choose and decide to not engage in any networking at all, you will be damaging yourself now and in the future. And just like you said, Matthew, there's a time to reap and a time to sow. So sow those seeds now so you can plant those trees so you can harvest later on.
The reality is that one of your next jobs is probably coming from the person who you're working with today, right? Like either it's from an internal role because you're, either from its internal ability or a colleague of yours now that has a really high thought of you, then moving on to another company and then wanting you to come work for them, or when you apply, being a massive advocate for you. You can find your next job opportunity right now by really investing in the people that are around you and building genuine human connections, but also delivering very high quality work. And if you can combine those three things together, you will have really high reliability of job security. And I speak to so many people that are like, I don't want to play the politics game. It's kind of tough bananas, man. That if you're in a business of more than 50 people, you are playing the politics game. Like you have to understand that is what we are all doing in our careers. And that every single person you speak to is influencing whether or not you are going to be able to progress and get your next opportunity. And so you have to embrace it and lean into it.
Yeah. If authenticity is more important to you, don't play the corporate game. That's my stance on it. Because
but I think you can play the corporate game and be authentic, though. I don't think that those things are
I'm
like
mutually exclusive. Yeah. But my point is I have some people who are like, I just want to be myself. I don't care about anybody else. Like they want to quote unquote be authentic, but they're not being authentic.
There's a point where that will limit you.
Yes, exactly.
Living your truth is not necessarily going to get you all the way.
Exactly. But I see this also more so with the younger generation because they're new. They're not sure. They see like people like myself on TikTok and, oh, she's being this way and I should be like that too. Oh, hold on. Hold your horses. Within like, for example, like when I was at Google or I prep people for these companies, I say, Google wants people who think outside of the box, but within the Google box.
Mm-hmm. It's like
And so
within the circle, but not outside the box.
correct. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Network internally, build a
Yeah.
reputation. Like I have had former hiring managers reach out to me on LinkedIn and hire me to help them with their job search. They're like, I don't know
Mm.
what I'm doing in my resume. I don't know what's going on. And I know you. I've worked with you, met with you plenty of times. I trust you. Here we go.
All of this is, it's ironic that one of our recent episodes was with Mike, because it really all came down to building internal human connections and investing in it from day one, and like trying to bring your whole self, but actually like all of these seeds that you're planting externally, internally, they all form a like risk safety net, right? Like, and the
Yes.
more of these, like if you only have one or two strands that's in this net, it's going to have loads of holes in it and you're going to fall through it. And the more connections that you make and the tighter this net gets over time, the better bounce it's going to have, the more likely it is that you're going to be caught and then pushed back up into your next role. And I think if everything you're hearing over maybe all of the episodes of Open to Work that we've done, it's that you have to invest in the people around you and build genuine human connection with people around you, and that will reap into other like safety in the future and positive outcomes in the future.
Agreed. I'll leave it with this story. So another true story. I had
Were you in
applied
finance?
to. I was. I had applied for a position at a FANG company. I won't say which one, and I didn't tell anybody. Okay, I just applied. I get a voice memo text message from a friend of mine whom I worked with. He's like, Farah, a little birdie called me and told me you applied to this company and wanted to do a backdoor reference, but I told them that you were awesome and you're this and this and that. So I just wanted to let you know. So I was like, oh, that was so sweet. Completely out of the blue.
Yeah. It's all part of this fabric. And I think it's like, if you're working today, I think it's time, and you feel like some of these stories around not being visible or like being stuck in a certain way or like being passed over for promotions, if this resonates with you, there are things you can do about it, right? You can start to, build out a career map. Who are the influences of your career? How can you give them visibility? Who's the person behind the person, right? Like all of these kind of concepts will help you more kind of reliably make that next step into doing something that's going to really excite you or kind of potentially game change your career. Okay, so Farah, to take us home, what are your top 3 tips for navigating the internal job market?
Don't wait for permission. Do your research before doing anything. And again, reputation is your resume.
Number 4, always prepare. But if you've done 1 through to 3, you've already got that one nailed, but I just have to say it one last time.
Agreed. Those are good tips.
Okay, awesome. Farah, where can we find you across the internet?
Well, you can find me across lots of social media platforms. If you're looking to learn, you can find me on YouTube, so Farah Sharghi. And I'm on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. And I also, right at the moment, am helping people prepare for their interviews. So I do offer like one-on-ones, resume, LinkedIn writing services. So if you go to any of those social media links, you can see a link to my storefront.
Nice, and I recommend Farah as well. I've been talking to her lots over the past kind of couple of months, and really support the work she's doing. So keep it up, Farah, and thank you so much for coming on again to the Open to Work podcast. For all of you regular listeners, you'll know that we now have our Open to Work toolkit, which is a newsletter you can subscribe to and get awesome job tips straight into your inbox every Friday. So why don't you bookmark your week? Mondays, listen to the podcast. Friday, check out the newsletter, and then Mondays you can get back into it again. So thank you so much, everyone. We're going to see you for the last episode of our series next week, which is a very special episode with a very special guest. I'm not going to share who it is, but I guarantee you won't see it coming. So we will see you all next week.